We're going to be talking about unlocking digital pathology today. There's a lot of different things you need to consider when doing that. Some of those things are scientific and technical in nature. And for that, we have Emily Goulet, who's our anatomic pathology consultant here at Lighthouse. And she's set up pathology labs for us, has 4 new lab setups in the process. And so she's going to be bringing the scientific side of the conversation today. We also have Danielle Tangor from Robinson Cole, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the legal regulatory ramifications of these changes in digital pathology, and we'll walk through what you need to know and where the hot wires are on that. And then we have our own Billy Mildenberger from our RCM team, who's going to go through some of the reimbursement billing coding concerns that you might have as you start looking at how do I go about billing digital pathology. And we have a guest speaker, Jason Massey from Mikroscan, as well as a Dr. Valasek from the Pathology Institute, who will be talking to us a little bit about some of the technology and instruments that can be used in order to enable some digital pathology. So we're going to go ahead and just go through a couple of housekeeping items first. To reduce your chances of buffering, close any apps, things you have running in the background that might cause that. Number one question that's always asked is, will the webinar be recorded? Yes, it will. Will it be sent to you? Yes, it will. What do you need to do? Nothing at all. If you registered for this webinar, you will automatically get a link, and it will continue to live on our website and on our YouTube channel as well, so you can always access it. So no need to stress on that. Questions, if you have them, there's a panel on the right. You'll see the Q&A. Feel free to drop questions in there. We're going to try to sort and organize those as they come in, and we will answer them as we have time at the end. But we have allotted a little bit of Q&A time so we can go through those. So our speakers will be sticking around to help us give you some good answers of anything that they can answer off the top of their head. We will also be providing opportunities for you to connect with any of these speakers directly. You can find that in the handout section. We will also be putting opportunities to connect with the speaker directly right onto your screen as they go through things. So you'll have a chance to respond at that time. We will be running a couple of polls during the webinar. We encourage you to participate in those. That's our feedback. That's how we hear from you on what you're seeing. And if we're missing the mark, let us know. But that's where you'll be able to give us a little bit of input, and we can crowdsource some of these bigger questions, and you can hear from your peers on what they're doing. So we'll go ahead and we're going to get started in just a minute. I'll give a plug for Lighthouse real quick. If you do have revenue cycle management related questions or payer questions, we are starting to see some payers pay for some of these digital pathology codes. And there's a lot of questions around how to go about that compliantly. We'd love to talk to you about your digital pathology RCM strategy, and we encourage you to reach out if that's something you have questions on, and we'd love to chat more offline on that. But we're going to go ahead and get started with Emily Goulet, who's going to take us through the evolution of pathology imaging. Emily, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Thanks, John. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm happy to be here with you today for this discussion of digital pathology. I thought we'd start things off with a brief look at the evolution of pathology imaging. So first there was gross imaging, or basically photography of the specimen before it's submitted for microscopic evaluation. This provides a permanent record of the appearance of the specimen and can help illustrate abnormalities that might be missed by histological sampling. Gross imaging can also be used to communicate clinical significant findings in a final report. Then there was live slide viewing, or telepathology. This is where we see microscopic images being digitized for the first time. Live slide viewing works by live remote control of a modified microscope. The images aren't stored for further use or reference, but there are many useful applications in intraoperative consultation and case review. Today we'll be digging into this technology a little bit, as well as the next evolution in pathology imaging, digital pathology. So if you aren't currently doing digital pathology, it's likely on your radar as a technology that's making waves in the field. It's a simple concept at its core of digitizing histology slides. This is done using whole slide scanners to create digital images with amazing resolution. Some of these images can be up to 10 gigapixels in size, and if you were to print that at a standard 300 dpi resolution, that's the size of a tennis court. So because of its size, specialized software is needed to compress the images, so it's reduced to a negotiable and optimal size for viewing and analysis. There are a variety of whole-slide scanners on the market that cater to a range of throughput needs, and you can find scanners that handle anywhere from 1 to 400 slides at a time. The images they produce are typically viewable using a magnification of 20 or 40x. So it's my belief that the digital pathology will transform the future of pathology services. I think we'll see improvements in patient safety due to reduced possibility of misidentification or transposition errors at multiple points along the diagnostic workflow. Digital pathology will also allow for advances in workflow, not only because of the flexibility it introduces, but also because it allows for rapid case tracking, archiving, and retrieval of slide images. Digital pathology is likely to have a positive impact on the pathology workforce as well. Right now, the demand for pathology services is growing faster than the number of pathologists available. So because of the innate flexibility of digital pathology, hopefully pathologists will be able to work from anywhere, making it easier to fill vacated roles. And the hope is that in time, the work-life balance will be more attainable and appealing to the next generation of pathologists, driving recruitment for medical graduates into the specialty. And last but not least, digital pathology will increase service quality for the patients, offering them faster access to their results. And additionally, improved information sharing and collaboration will hopefully lead to enhanced diagnostic confidence with a higher quality of diagnosis. So no discussion of digital pathology is complete without mentioning AI. The possibilities for how AI can assist the pathologists are ever growing. But at a high level, computer-aided diagnosis will help with some of the more tedious and demanding tasks involved in pathology diagnosis. These trends are transforming pathology into a more data-driven and efficient field that will ultimately enhance the diagnostic capabilities of pathology as a whole. So if you're thinking about diving into digital pathology, here are some of the first things you need to consider. Why do you want to implement digital pathology? Define your needs, goals, and objectives. Understanding these things thoroughly will aid in your decision-making process. Identify your implementation team. Obviously, histology and pathology will be involved, but also your IT department, data management, and your C-suite. You want to consider your infrastructure needs. You'll need a scanner and workstation, but also servers and networks. And then you'll also need image management software or some other whole slide viewing interface. And while you're thinking about these things too, it's important to consider that you'll need to do a validation. Not only is it required, but it's essential to ensure the system's accuracy, reliability, and equivalence to traditional light microscopy. You want to tailor your validation and training to ensure that your pathologist views specimens, stains, and diagnoses that are relevant to their regular workload. So in closing on this section, I just wanted to say that adding digital pathology to your lab takes a considerable amount of time, thought, and resources. But the decision to implement should be more than just a consideration of return on investment. Digital pathology is headed to being the standard of care.
All right. Well, thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. I think by all accounts, digital pathology makes common sense, but does it make financial sense is one of those important questions. And so at Lighthouse, we'd love to have that conversation with you. If you're thinking about implementing digital pathology or even just pathology in general being brought in-house, we'd love to walk through the pluses and minuses of that, show you a Gantt chart of how long it takes, and maybe some pro formas on what the revenue looks like related to that. But I'm going to hand the mic over to Billy from our RCM team next, so she can walk through some of the billing, coding, reimbursement concerns associated with this and talk to you about that part of it. Billy, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, John. So we have some of the current Category 3 digital pathology codes list here with their associated procedures. And these are relatively new codes. In 2023, the AMA released new digital pathology CPT codes developed by CAP. These codes are designed to report the additional clinical staff work and service requirements associated with digitizing glass microscope slides for primary diagnosis. So in 2023, 13 add-on codes were introduced, and in 2024, 30 new add-on codes were released. The future outlook, it doesn't seem that there are any new Category 3 codes specifically announced for digital pathology. So I think we have everything we need here on this current screen. We're going to go ahead and flip to the Category 3 code reimbursement that we're seeing here. Right now, Medicare doesn't assign an RVU to Category 3 codes, rendering them non-payable. We do, however, know that some MACs have the discretion to determine allowable payments for these codes on a case-by-case basis. What we are seeing is some commercial payers are reimbursing the Category 3 codes. We have some PPO, HMO, indemnity plans with Blue Cross, Blue Shield, ARP, UMR, Aetna, Physician Mutual, and more. And then we're also seeing some Medicare and Medicaid managed cares go through UHC and allow payments for these services. And typically what we are seeing is an average payment between $20 and $35 when these are allowed. Some things that you should be thinking about with seeing these payments from some of these commercial payers is, how are you currently assigning a fee for service? We have seen clients price these at, a cent to ensure they pass through clearinghouse edits. That's a similar approach that was used during the PQRS days. And then we're also seeing some clients determine the price based on the actual cost incurred for the service provided. So this would be a good time to align your fee for service to ensure accurate reimbursement and reflect the true value of services provided. We recommend to assign fees for Category 3 digital pathology based on the actual cost incurred. This approach not only aligns with the true expense of digitizing glass microscopic slides, but also prepares your practice for a smoother transition if these codes are upgraded to Category 1 in the future. By doing so, you can avoid the need for significant adjustments later and ensure consistent and fair compensation from payers. As you know, each payer has unique policies for reimbursing Category 3 codes, and it's important to check with each payer to determine if they indeed cover these services and what specific conditions they may require. Let's see. We have some category, we'll move on to the proper Category 3 code utilization and compliance. As far as documentation, we want to ensure that the pathology report specifies that the case was read digitally and includes the name of the system used. With that being said, you also want to make sure the documentation includes the address of the location where the interpreting pathologist read the slides. Also, it's important to note that all slides on a report may not have been read digitally, so we want to ensure that the pathology report format can differentiate between digitized slides and slide analysis and microscopic slide analysis. That's something to consider. The application for Category 3 code should be applied to the technical component only for digital pathology. However, in 2024, we did see some additional codes, such as peripheral blood smears, that do not have a separate TCPC component. So in those cases, the entity that prepares a digitized slide image or performs that digitization procedure may report the applicable add-on Category 3 code. So that's important to note. There's a handful that don't have that TC component currently. Pairing with primary codes, Category 3 codes must be reported alongside the primary CPT code. These add-on codes are billed as a one-to-one unit of service with the primary procedure code. So we have an example. If you are digitizing slides for a surgical pathology procedure, you would report the appropriate Category 3 code, add-on code for each primary surgical procedure performed. As we're all aware, both NCCI and MUE edits are updated quarterly, so it's important to stay current with those updates to ensure compliance. I don't foresee any changes in that. And then regular updates, you want to stay informed about updates to Category 3 codes as they're temporary and subject to change. There are some there's information basically after 5 years, the AMA will either convert that Category 3 charge to a Category 1 code. And that's what we're hoping for, but we're still unclear if that's going to happen. But that would be great. We'll get a little money from what we're doing in digital pathology, and hopefully that would encourage others to go ahead and start digital pathologies.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Billy. That's really helpful. So now we have a little bit better knowledge about the technical side of it and also the reimbursement side. But now the big question that has to be answered is, is it compliant for what type of lab you have and the application that you'd be using it? And for that, we're going to have Danielle Tangor from Robinson Cole walk us through some of the considerations for making sure that you do it successfully and compliantly.
Thanks so much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We're going to try to cover some of the regulatory considerations that we have here. Just a note, as typical, this is not forming an attorney-client relationship, and this is just general information. So general disclaimer, thanks. So I want to talk today about a variety of things, as you're probably familiar with, if you're in the lab space, pathology space, there's always a host of things you have to think about, and a maze of regulations and laws to consider, and digital pathology is no different. And so I'm going to try to highlight some of the ones today that we have that you need to think through and talk through some of these. So the first one I want to address is, digital pathology has been around for a while, but we saw a big rise of it right during COVID with the rise of remote work and things of that nature. And so there were some enforcement discretions during the public health emergency of COVID that allowed for a variety of scenarios that were typically not permitted to exist. Historically under CLIA, laboratories had to file a separate application for each laboratory location unless it met a specific exception. And, for cytology and cytology slide preparations, they had to be evaluated on the premises of the laboratory. And these were some, that had some waivers, in light of the discussions and the quality assurance and discussions at the CLIAC level too. CMS came out in May of 2023 that allowed for continued enforcement discretion for some aspects. Here, CMS indicated that they would continue to exercise enforcement discretion for pathologists to review digital laboratory data, results, and images remotely without obtaining a separate CLIA certificate for the remote testing site, as long as it falls within certain parameters. And so this is really important, and they put parameters around what they consider digital data. And it's really important to think about this, and that given that this is an enforcement discretion, that doesn't make it the rule of law. And so this is something where CMS could change their mind. And it's important just to make sure anytime you're assessing any type of digital pathology arrangement, whether this is still in place or not. We also expect at some point to see additional regulations. CLIAC has been talking about for a number of years, how to bring the CLIA regulations up to speed with the rise of technology, including digital pathology. We saw recommendations over the last year from CLIAC on how CLIA could be updated, particularly around digital pathology, topics of discussion, centered around data processing and quality management issues, particularly with turning slides into digital and then reading and how long you have to keep the slides and what that looks like. And so there is, been a report and recommendations, but a recognition that there is a move to digital and that's, can be the wave of the future. And so, at some point, there's likely to be a change in regulations to accommodate this with, potential other parameters around that. We just don't know. And then you also have to think about, any state regulations. For example, New York is, heavily regulates laboratories and pathologists, and they did have determined that the use of digital imaging slides doesn't require a separate submission as a laboratory developed test, which is, important, particularly with the new LDT rule and being in New York. And they even went so far as to say this includes digital imaging of slides with subsequent use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So that's important to keep in mind. New York's just one state, but for all those who are in New York, you need to keep in mind what CLEP has to say about digital pathology, and then also think about any other states that you're in and the regulations. Regulations often lag behind what we see on the rise of technology, and so we can expect to see more in the future. Some other things that you have to think about from a regulatory perspective is because we now have this, kind of digital nomad telehealth type situations for pathologists where they may be, all over the country, and, reading the professional component and doing things digitally. The pathologists do have to still be licensed in the same state where primary diagnosis is rendered. There are various state licensure laws. There's also the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, but that's an important part as we think about, kind of this telehealth type model, that everyone is appropriate licensed, not only in the lab under CLIA and things of that nature, but also from a professional standpoint, and that you're following all the state requirements too. That may also extend to patient consent. We're seeing movement in that area, that, there's kind of more transparency to patients and disclosures that may happen. And so individual states may also have varying requirements for additional information regarding that. So that's important to check. The other important part is making sure that you're using a system that either is exempt from FDA approval or has FDA approval, and making sure that you're following all of that. And we're not going to get into LDT rule today, but if there is, any implication there, that as well. I think the other, kind of big thing is that anytime we talk about digital, we also have to talk about data security and privacy. So, there's heightened protections with HIPAA, but also around states. States are making a lot of laws as of late regarding, privacy and data protection. There's a myriad of state laws that are kind of ever changing and increasing in scope. And so it's really important that you look and review those and make sure that your standards and your opt-outs and your consent covers all of that, including each of the states that you'd be in. And so it's also really important to perform privacy risk analysis as you are digitizing and having this on a network, and that it's very secure and you're doing penetration and all of the other good privacy security rules, just because there is a lot of data here that's now, digital existing out there. So all things to think about, and then the last part is also just any state regulations regarding, even if it is digital, what is required. This is particularly around, as we see the increase of AI that we just talked about. There is a lot of AI use in digital learning, and so there needs to be appropriate governance policies AI is a particular focus. Who knows what's going to be in store for that, but there has been a focus, you know, under the current administration with various thought papers about that. And so it's important to keep track of that and think about, if you are applying AI, any considerations around that, particularly also um, in state laws and guidance. And then, still adhering to state regulations on pathologists about, even if you are using AI to some degree, take New York, for example, you still have to have a licensed pathologist to examine and report out all histopathology cases, gynecological cases, with certain abnormalities and things of that nature. And even if you're using artificial intelligence or machine learning and digital pathology, those applications still apply. So make sure that you consider all of that. Then we still have, the regulatory federal framework, and there are state applications of these as well. And so when you're billing Medicare, Medicaid, you have to consider the regulatory fraud and abuse laws. The first one, we're talking pathology, so we have to consider the Stark Law, which prohibits a physician from making referrals to an entity for certain healthcare services, including laboratory service, if the physician has a financial relationship, unless the exception applies. If a physician office lab is going to use digital pathology, they also need to think through this and talk through, whether an exception applies, whether it's the in-office ancillary services exception, the physician services exception, and we'll go through a couple examples, but these are really important, and the regulations haven't caught up to digital pathology, so there's some open questions, I think, but and challenges, but really important that you talk with a qualified healthcare attorney. Not that I'm trying to promote, but just that whoever you use, they need to be really well versed in this regulatory framework, given the maze of laws and regulations. And the Stark Law is one of strict liability, so that's important to consider and comply with. We also have, with the fraud and abuse world, the anti-kickback statute. Briefly, it's can be a criminal statute, can also be a basis for a False Claims Act, and it prohibits offering or accepting any form of remuneration, which is defined incredibly broadly, for referrals or service billed to any federal healthcare program. And that's important, in some of these arrangements. And then with pathology, we always have to think about the anti-markup rule and other state rules about direct billing and anti-markup and things of that nature, and who can bill. Additionally, other regulatory framework, we haven't seen a lot of application of ECRA in this space, but yet another statute that applies to both commercial payers and federal payers, that's modeled after the AKS, that prohibits payment of remuneration, again defined broadly, for referring a patient to a clinical laboratory and other substance abuse type providers. And then finally, as we're looking at arrangements, we always have to think about state law considerations for fee splitting or payer considerations. So of course, there's a maze of regulatory framework that you have to think about when you're adopting digital pathology and having the appropriate policies. And if you're using AI as part of it, there's additional ones as well. Kind of the two scenarios we're seeing a lot is, pathology group just decides to use a digital platform solely within connection with their group. They're billing for TCPC, very straightforward, basically converting their practice into moving to digital. As we talked before, we have to still think about, licensure and patient consent and things of that nature, but we still have to address, the Stark and office ancillary service exception, depending on how the pathologist is, employed or contracted with the group and where they're sitting. Particularly, with the in-office ancillary service exception, you have to give thought to the prong about where the location where is the service is furnished and whether you meet all of the exceptions. And so that's a really important conversation to have with your counsel. And then you still have to consider all the CAP and CLIA considerations we've talked about. Secondly, scenario 2, this one's, more challenging in the analysis to think through, but we've seen these pathology digitization companies. They contract with, for example, hospitals or POLs, and they, provide this service to, help reduce the cost. Sometimes they will partner with pathology groups to perform the purchase service or the professional component. And there's, various reimbursement models about who globally bills and whether you're doing any purchase services. Here, you have to consider not only the Stark and office ancillary service exception that we were just going through, and the location and who's furnishing the services and whether it meets that, or the other Stark exception of physician services exception. You still have to consider any markup with regards to reimbursement. And then with whether it's pathology or digital pathology, laboratories and providers really need to give thought to any type of arrangement, given the advisory opinion in the fall of last year. There was a negative opinion issued by the Office of Inspector General, Advisory Opinion 2306, regarding purchase services for anatomic pathology. And that's, while it may not be, news breaking, it did, clearly state their view on where the kickback statutes implicated, and the various safe harbors and how the OIG is viewing this. And so that's really important to keep in mind, given that it is an unfavorable opinion, which is not always seen. And then I think you always have to keep in mind that even if CLIA says, sure, we can do this, we can read digitally, that's not the end of the story, right? There's all of these other regulatory considerations, both on a federal level and a state level. And particularly when you're talking about billing pairs, if you don't comply with all the laws, the anti-kickback statute, Stark, things of that nature, it can be a basis for a False Claims Act, and no one wants to be in those situations with dealing with an investigation or a complaint, and kind of the litigation costs. So it's really important that you set up your arrangements really thoughtfully, and that you have good policies and procedures and address, the regulatory framework from the fraud and abuse perspective, but also from, all of the state licensure and data privacy rules. There's so much to talk about in digital pathology, and just wanted to highlight some of the issues that we are seeing, and things for you guys to think about as you implement, and go forward, with digital pathology.
Thank you, Danielle. If anybody was scared by any of that or feels confused or exposed, we do encourage you to reach out to Danielle for some one-on-one consults to discuss your specific situation. Robinson Cole, super helpful, knowledgeable on this topic, and ready to walk you through how to tiptoe through that landmine field compliantly. Next, we're going to be bringing in Jason Massey and pathologist Dr. Valasek, who will be talking about some of the technology that you can utilize in order to enable digital pathology in your laboratory or practice. So Jason Massey is from Mikroscan, and he's going to tell us a little bit about their product, and then introduce Dr. Valasek, who will give us a real-world use case of digital pathology. Jason?
All right. Thanks, John. My name is Jason Massey. I'm the National Sales Director with Mikroscan. Although there's companies popping up quite frequently nowadays with the adoption of digital pathology, Mikroscan has been around for about 14 years. We're based in Southern California, and we offer a unique product for digital pathology. As we've talked about so far in this presentation, there is a important distinction between a microscopic evaluation of a slide and a whole slide image. And Mikroscan offers both options. So we feel like we're a great entry level into digital pathology because we start off, you can start off using the device as a microscope, looking at the image just as you would on a microscope with the digital camera attached. And then you can transition to whole slide imaging and scan at the 20x and 40x magnification that was mentioned earlier. So this is our product portfolio here. On the left side is a scanner and a microscope. On the right side is just a microscope. And in the middle, we have our 20 slide capacity autoloader. So that gives you a 20 slide capacity. As mentioned earlier, there are some scanners on the market that have higher capacity, up to 400 slides. Mikroscan specializes in the lower volume scanning. So this is kind of a breakdown of why you would do telemicroscopy versus whole slide imaging. If you're doing telemicroscopy, the advantages are you can view the slide in real time, so you don't have to worry about the time it would take to scan a slide. You don't have to worry about QCing the scan or uploading the scan and managing that big digital image. As mentioned earlier, the slides are quite big. They can be over 2 gigabytes in size. So they can be a challenge to upload and to store and to manage long term. So when you're doing live microscopy, another advantage is it gives you immediate access to the slide. So for anything that has urgency associated with it, such as a frozen section or a rapid on-site evaluation, the live telemicroscopy is a good choice for those reasons. Whole slide imaging is regulated by the FDA as a Class 2 device, so it requires a 510(k) clearance. We do not have that at Mikroscan, so for whole slide imaging, we promote the product for research use only, and we promote it for such things as archival, research, image analysis, QA, and for sharing images. So another advantage, a couple other advantages of the Mikroscan platform are the size. Some of these big high throughput scanners require special tables and rooms to operate in. The Mikroscan device is very similar to a regular microscope. It can be placed on a cart. It can be moved from lab to lab or from around the hospital as needed. A lot of our customers place them on carts, as shown here in the picture. And they can be wheeled around the hospital and taken wherever a slide is produced. And then that's, instead of a pathologist being on site to look at the slide, the pathologist can log in remotely from wherever they're located to look at it in live mode. Another distinction is Mikroscan. The Mikroscan product is actually registered with the FDA as a light microscope. So when a pathologist is looking at the device, they can bill it as a microscopic read because it is an actual light microscope. And if you see the picture here, inside the box it looks just like a microscope. There's 5 Olympus objectives, 2, 4, 10, 20, and 40x objectives. And so when you're looking in live mode, you're not digitally zooming in and out. You're actually changing the objective turret, and you can focus up and down in real time. That's another big advantage. A lot of whole slide scanners will just produce one image plane, and it may or may not be at the right focal plane to make a diagnosis. That's why validating a whole slide imaging device is so important, because you're only getting one focal plane, which is a very big difference in pathology compared to microscopes. So with that, I would like to hand over the rest of the time to Dr. Mark Valasek. And Dr. Valasek is a practicing pathologist with a GI subspecialty. He's also the medical director, medical laboratory director, and CEO of the Pathology Institute, which is located in Bryan, Texas. Mark has been an early adopter of digital pathology and is currently using it in his practice. So would like to hand over the rest of the time to Mark to talk about how he's using it in his practice.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate the introduction. As Jason said, I'm the medical laboratory director at Pathology Institute. and we are a specialty histology lab, which we'll get into a little bit, that uses remote microscopy with the Mikroscan device. A little bit about us. We're a subspecialized expert-only anatomic pathology outfit. We do liver and GI pathology. One of our big focuses right now are clinical trials histologic endpoints with pathologist central reading and consulting. We also have a histology and microscopy core lab with digital pathology capabilities. So for this specific use case, we use consensus pathology using the Mikroscan for liver clinical trials. So liver clinical trials are a little bit different in that they require more than one pathologist to agree on the features of a given case. And so that's where the Mikroscan comes in and is very useful for us. So just a kind of general background, some of the current challenges in liver clinical trials include those listed here. The Mikroscan device hits on several of these to some degree, but the main feature for us that the main problem it was really addressing is slow turnaround time during screening exams. So whereas we're used to on the clinical world, we're used to having most of our cases done in 24 or 48 hours. In the clinical trials world, many times labs have slower turnaround times. And so for us to be able to offer results very quickly, sometimes same day, that is a very important feature for our business. So just like you would expect in a normal histology lab, our tissue workflow is that we receive the specimen, we accession it, we make sure it's of a certain quality, we gross, process, and embed the specimen, cut the specimen, stain, and then the specimen undergoes microscopy and pathological evaluation. The pathologists score the case and report the features through various mechanisms to our clients. So as you know, these specimens can be received as either tissue or unstained slides. After processing, embedding, and sectioning, we stain the slides. For liver clinical trials, the two big stains that we use are standard routine hematoxin and eosin, and your routine special stain, a trichrome stain. So the hematoxin and eosin is used to help determine how much inflammation is there, are there balloon cells, and from that we determine a NAFLD activity score. And then the trichrome stain, as you all know, highlights collagen and allows us to determine the fibrosis stage of the case. Is it advanced fibrosis, or is it a minimal amount of fibrosis, or is it normal? So once these slides are stained, we put them onto the Mikroscan. And for us, the Mikroscan, as you know, it's a robotic microscope. And what's great for us is this allows us to access key opinion leaders in pathology that have experience in liver clinical trials or GI clinical trials or other disease entities. It allows us to show them a glass slide, no matter what their geographic location is, or if they're, if they're traveling or something like that, they'll be able to access a glass slide wherever they may be. So this allows direct observation of the glass slides through streaming software. It's an FDA exempt microscope for the live view, like Jason had mentioned. And the slides can be viewed at various magnifications. There's an autofocus and a manual focus available. And sometimes that's helpful when we're looking at very detailed features like balloon cells, for example, in fatty liver. Obviously, if you're looking for features like smaller features like viral inclusions, things like that, it's helpful to be able to autofocus and make sure you're seeing what you believe you are seeing. So it allows observation at different Z depths and improves identification for us. So this is kind of an example. This is a different set of stains. So this is kind of what your heads-up display looks like. So on the left-hand side, this is your digital, or they're glass slides, but this is your depiction of a palette, what you would expect as a palette in a normal kind of analog sense in the lab. So we can house 20 slides here, and they're in duplicates, and we're able to drive around. If you look at the left-hand side, you have all of your objectives, you have your autofocus, and on the right-hand side, on the upper left-hand corner, you have kind of a macro image of the slide. But this larger image in the middle, this is a live view of the actual tissue. And so you can go in at higher magnification, you can drive around, you can see what you need to see in live mode. So this has been extremely useful for us because I can look at this as an individual pathologist, but also another pathologist can look at this simultaneously. So we actually arrive at our consensus features. We can do those in real time and have more than one pathologist look at these slides at the exact same time and discuss any controversial findings that we see. So it's been very useful. So the major benefits to us of remote microscopy using the Mikroscan for Pathology Institute have been direct access to pathology experts regardless of their geographic location or travel schedule, extremely fast turnaround time, sometimes less than a day. And then also it's convenient that it's an FDA exempt device in live mode and does not need additional regulatory requirements. In our experience, we actually evaluate tissues in a more systematic fashion using this as compared to like an Olympus, BX41 series or something like that, a standard microscope, because of the way that you navigate the slide, we were actually end up being more systematic and I think more consistent in how we read the slides. And then of great benefit, this system is complementary to other digital pathology platforms. So it works hand in hand really well with WSI platforms, either on the Mikroscan or with other vendors. So those are some of the features that have been really helpful to us at Pathology Institute. So with that, obviously, here's my contact information. That Lighthouse can also provide that. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those later.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Valasek. That's super helpful. And we will move into some Q&A from you guys. I hope that was a helpful presentation, and there's a lot there to get into. And want to also mention, just so I don't forget, before we jump into the Q&A, we do have another webinar tomorrow. We rarely do that. We try to keep it to one a month, but we have back-to-back this month. Somehow they just collided. So you'll see that pop onto your screen, Mastering Turnaround Time Process Optimization. We're bringing in a group of Lean Six Sigma experts that are going to do kind of a master class, Spark Notes, Cliff Notes on Lean Six Sigma in the lab efficiency, what you can be thinking about as you try to master optimization efficiency inside your lab. So if you're interested, we encourage you to register free. As always, we always keep our webinars free for all of our audience. And we do that through providing services as well. So we did mention how Mikroscan was FDA approved in live mode, but was a research use only device for whole slide imaging. It would need to be validated as an LDT if you were to use it for off-label for clinical diagnostics in whole slide. Lighthouse, that's what we do. We do help labs with clinically validating LDTs all the time. So that's not a deal stopper. We would be happy to talk to you about what it looks like to do that with this device or any others. If you're running into clinical LDT issues, we're here for that conversation. So we're going to jump into a couple of questions. I'm going to grab a question from Robert Meek, who wants to know, what are the application regulations with respect to digital pathology application in clinical research, especially in regards to data integrity, quality assurance, validation, and oversight? And I'm going to direct that one to Danielle. Danielle, do you have some thoughts on a response for that?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I think, when we think about digital pathology and clinical research, we still have the same validation, considerations that we do under, CLIA and CAP and et cetera. But with the digital imaging and in the clinical research piece, you need to make sure that it's, that you're setting out the standards in the protocol, right? And making sure you're clear on that piece and what you're going to be doing. And then the other part would be the patient consent. I think that would be kind of one of the critical pieces, just because it would be slightly different. It would also depend on what how you're using digital path in the clinical research trial. The other, big one that comes to mind, and all of these can change depending on what type of clinical trial or clinical research you're trying to do. But, some clinical research crossing not only states, but countries, kind of the data security piece that I was talking about earlier is really important. Like the EU has the a very strict GDPR regulations, and so you would have to be considerate of that and make sure that all of the data protection would apply. And so it really, depending on the scope of how you're applying the clinical research, you would just have to really think through those pieces as well.
All right, thank you. We're gonna take one from Hannah, who wants to know, does she understand correctly that the Mikroscan can hold 20 slides? Can the pathologist switch between slides? Jason, do you want to field that question?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to, John. Thanks. So the answer is yes. The base model is 2-slide only. And then the autoloader, which was shown in the middle picture on my first slide, the autoloader has a cassette that holds 20 slides. And those were depicted in one of Mark's slides on the left-hand panel. It looks very similar to the 20 slides in a cardboard tray. Those 20 slides can all, you see macro images of the 20 slides, and then you can pull them into the device 2 at a time and look at them remotely.
Thanks, Jason. That's helpful.
Can I add to that real quick, John?
Sure.
So, also, for the 20-slide loader, there's basically a cartridge, which is kind of analogous to a pallet. So you can have more than one cartridges. So let's say we have more than 20 slides to look at. Well, you pull off the one cartridge and you add another cartridge. So you can very easily add on another set of 20 or another kind of pallet-sized amount of cases, if that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you. The rest of these questions, I'm going to open it up to the floor of speakers. And so if you have thoughts, feel free to jump in. If we get crickets, we'll move on to another one. But recommendations for storage of these images. Should they be stored in the cloud, kept on premise? What do you guys think? All right. Sounds like both are options. Jason, you have a thought?
Yeah, they're both options. I think it really depends on an individual basis. If you have the infrastructure to keep it on-prem, and if you have, some people have such tight security and compliance restrictions, they like to keep it on-prem. But I would say the cloud is becoming more and more popular every day, especially as the size of the images become bigger and people start getting into AI. I think the cloud is a better platform to store the images.
Perfect. I'm going to answer Tayaba's question. Can you discuss the distinction between RUO and diagnostic use? Jason, correct me if there's any difference in opinion from Mikroscan's perspective. So I'm just speaking from Lighthouse here. But RUO products are typically not FDA approved for clinical diagnostic use. So in order to use an RUO product in a clinical diagnostic use case, you'll need to go through a clinical validation inside your lab specific to your lab, and then have that signed off on by your medical laboratory director. So as sold, the Mikroscan device is FDA approved in live mode, but not in whole slide imaging. Is that correct, Jason? I say that right?
Yeah, we're registered with the FDA as a medical device. It's a light microscope, so it's class 1. So when we're promoting it as a microscope, we can promote it for clinical use. But as a slide scanner, it is not registered with the FDA for clinical use. So it's research use only from our perspective, from a vendor.
Sure. Yep. So if you were to use it clinically, an LDT process would need to be undertaken. We also have what are the costs per slide for digital pathology? $3 is that what was thrown out? Is what Robert Tessler wants to know. Anybody want to comment on cost for processing digital slides? I don't know if that $3 number was mentioned. I didn't catch it if it was, Robert. I think that there's probably a lot of variability in determining cost per slide. I know, like most lab tests, the economies of scale take effect, and so the fixed costs of instruments and things become a much smaller part of the equation as volume picks up. And so I think that one is a tough one to answer just without a lot of other information. Another question that Robert had was timing on either CAP EAC or DPA submitting cost and utilization to AMA. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or inside knowledge on that. Does anyone know when we may expect to see cost and utilization submitted? All right, we'll move on. Mikroscan's Z scanning compared to others that use Z stacking. That seems like it would be one that Jason, you or Dr. Velasek would probably be best equipped to answer.
Yeah, I'll take a first shot at it, then maybe Mark can speak from his experience. When we're in live mode, it's not a scan, it's just a live streaming image. So the wheel on your mouse is your focus, just like the focus on a microscope. So you really have free reign of going up and down in the Z plane throughout the specimen. Scanners have to focus on the slide and then produce a static digital image. And there are different technologies on the market for that. But the most common is just to make a focus map and then capture one plane. And then you don't have the ability to focus up and down. Some scanners can capture multiple planes, and then you have, but you don't have a smooth focus between the different planes. You just have discrete number of planes, whether it be 3 or 5 or 7 or examples. But those are relatively uncommon because it takes a long time to scan those, and the size of the image multiplies for every Z plane that you capture.
Yeah, I agree with Jason on that. I can't speak too much to the quality difference between vendors for Z scanning, and primarily because we normally use those focal points to generate a very good single layer scan, right? So because that's more efficient in terms of data storage. And so comparison between Z stacks, I can't really give you information on that. We generally use a single layer scan that utilizes focal points so that everything's in focus.
Great. Thanks, guys. Dawn has a question. Billy, I don't know if we are able to answer this off the cuff or if this might be something better taken offline, but for prostate GO 416 does not have a digital code, and they have cases that also have stains with prostate BX. Is it okay to have digital pathology code 88342, 341, 344, but not on the GO 416?
So I know there is no current code for the GO416 that's been brought up multiple times. I'm not sure necessarily if the 342, 341, 344 will be paid without that. I haven't run into a specific case. It's potentially going to be denied based on that. But I think if you write a good enough appeal, they might overturn that denial.
Okay, that's good advice. All right, guys. Well, just summarizing some of the polls we had too, it looked like about 30% of you guys are maybe using digital pathology now. 70% are either not or maybe slightly using it. Of those 30%-ish labs that are using digital pathology, a lot of you are not billing those category 3 codes. Might be worth trying. So hopefully, if nothing else that you get out of this presentation today might be to go ahead and try that. We are starting to see some reimbursement flow there, and hopefully that'll be a trend. And then just a reminder, tomorrow's webinar, if you're interested, lab efficiency, turnaround time, also a really valuable thing to improve. And so hopefully it would pay off for the hour of time that you give on your lunch hour tomorrow. So we hope to see you then. We thank you all for attending, and we will be following up, and you'll get a link to this presentation if you need to refer back to it. And thank you to all of our speakers today. Really appreciate it.